Aloha kākoa pau. I'm Kaiopua Fife with the Kiwani Foundation, welcoming you to one more segment of Voices of Truth, one-on-one with Hawaii's future. You can probably see in the background that we're once again on the grounds of Iolani Palace. We just seem to be drawn here over and over and over. You'll see some segments of our discussion topic locations dropped in occasionally throughout this interview, but this is where we're at Iolani Palace. I'd like to introduce you to our guest today, Kat Brady. Aloha, Kat, and mahalo for being here with us.
Aloha, Kaiopua. Thank you so much.
You're so busy, and actually we met earlier this week. You've been on the run this week, and so have I, and it's pretty neat to be busy, isn't it?
Oh, plenty to do.
Well, I know you're really doing a lot of different things, a lot of different directions, but today we've got a focus. You have a focus that you want to discuss with us, inform us. You know, our theme on Voices of Truth is to heighten awareness on different topics, to encourage people to get involved.
Yes.
Can't think of a better person to encourage that as far as involvement is concerned. And we hope that our viewers out there in television land are going to be moved by someone of our interviews, or maybe many, to actually get out into the community and take part, find out what their kuleana is and go for it. So today you're going to talk to us about
prison issues, why Hawaii has more than half of its prison population transferred to private prisons on the U.S. continent, which is a huge problem. Why Hawaii is incarcerating so many Native Hawaiians, way more than the census. The census is about 20% Native Hawaiians in Hawaii, and we have the department says 40% in prison. Anybody who's been in prisons knows it's closer to 60 to 70%.
Yeah.
And the majority of people who are transferred, or I like to say banished, to prisons in Arizona and Kentucky are Native Hawaiian. The majority of people who are banished are Native Hawaiian.
Yeah, they're not going to Siberia in this case, but they're definitely going away
it's
from the
kind of
homeland.
like Siberia, because the desert of Arizona, they have Corrections Corporation of America built a private prison solely for Hawaiian inmates in the Sonoran Desert. I could not think of a more desolate place to send people from a tropical environment.
Yeah.
It is so dry, it is so hot in the summer, it is cold in the winter. The prisons they look like supermaxes, big concrete boxes, very, long slit windows, very stark. And my first impression, I went there in November with the Senate Public Safety Committee. My first impression was nothing could grow here. And what a place to build a prison after Hawaii has made a commitment to rehabilitation and reentry. It just is the absolute antithesis of rehabilitation and reentry.
Well, I can see that you're very passionate about this. Where do you get this passion from? I mean, we kind of got a little bit ahead of ourselves because we want our viewers to know a little bit of something about you. Clearly, you've got something to work on and something to talk about, but how did you get on this topic, how did you get wrapped up in this?
Well, I'm an environmentalist, and I guess ever since I've been a kid, I've always really cared about justice. I was always the smallest kid in the neighborhood, and the kid who always defended the one kid everybody was picking on. And I became, as I grew, I really cared about the environment, realizing that without a healthy, clean environment, we're all doomed. And around the 90s, I started to wonder, where is all the money going? In the 80s, Hawaii had plenty of money, and in the 90s,
surplus,
all of a sudden, we were cutting all these social programs, we were incarcerating people like crazy, and I was wondering, what's going on? So I actually went down and looked at the budget. And the one budget in the state that was constantly rising while everything else was tanking was the Department of Public Safety. So then I got really curious, who's in there and how come? And I quickly realized that most people are in there for drugs or drug-related crimes. So my first area of interest was, well, how many programs do we have to deal with drug abuse? Well, that opened up a huge door and shined a bright light in my mind because there was not enough. We have probably in the state less than 15% of the people who are incarcerated in Hawaii get any drug treatment. This new program-intensive prison they built in Arizona for almost 2,000 men has only 232 beds in the level 3 treatment, which is where many people need to be. So why are we doing that?
Let me ask you something. Now, you mentioned that during this particular period of time when it caught your attention, budgets were going down everywhere except within
Public safety.
public safety, so their budgets were being increased.
Yes.
I have a curiosity about government funding, whether it's at state or federal, where you see these huge budgets heading up, more money going in particular areas, when at the same time you see that the indicators, the bad negative indicators, continue to rise too. So it makes me wonder, you know, you're throwing additional money at the problem, but why is there not progress made? And you say there weren't programs to deal with some of the basics of the problem. So you see, you understand what my quandary is?
Yes.
They throw so much money into things, and yet things stay at least as bad or get worse. What's going on?
Well, you know, I think it's interesting. Hawaii likes to start programs, but they never really include that evaluation piece. So we don't really know how they're doing. And it turns out to be, you know, people who have friends or some sort of connections get their programs funded consistently. And many of the wonderful community programs that are done by grassroots people who are doing things not for money, but because they really care and they want to really rebuild their communities, those guys are struggling every year. So we've had in prison lots of good programs. Oops, 2 years, no more funding. So sorry.
End of the program.
There they go. So, you know, it's very inconsistent. And the only way you deal with people who offend or who violate the law is consistency. That's what you'd want to demonstrate. That's the kind of behavior you'd want to model, and we're not.
Have to stay with it. Yeah, that's a real frustration. You mentioned people who are working in the community and having rough times, underfunded or not funded at all.
Yes.
It's been interesting to me to see instances where sometimes a successful unfunded community program, not to get too far off the subject, has been doing pretty well, and people are volunteering and there's energy and excitement, things are accomplished. And then somehow they crack through and they actually get funded. And sometimes the funding is the worst thing that can happen.
You're right.
And all of a sudden the productivity goes down, the enthusiasm goes down, and the energy is misdirected to chasing the money.
Yes.
And not serving the need.
Yes. You asked how, you know, I got started. So I'm the Assistant Executive Director of Life of the Land, an environmental group. And out of Life of the Land, we run a community initiative called Community Alliance on Prisons. And we've been doing this for about 10 years, and we are not funded. In fact, we just got our first grant this year to organize a broader community outreach. So this is after 10 years, it's the first year we've gotten funding. But that funding is all to do certain projects, you know, to really go out into the community, to educate the community on what's happening. But you're right, I think people get really hung up then on chasing the money and then doing what the money calls for instead of what their mission is.
Yeah, exactly.
So for me, I'd rather have no money and do the things that work than to be at that trough where you're begging or you're beholden. I'm not going to do either.
Yeah, that's. I actually spent a couple of days this week in discussions just such as these, as to you have people who have the funders, who have the money, who have agendas or they have priorities. And you have the community that has a need, also has priorities, and how the two can meet and yet serve each other's needs. And that's That's a real tricky thing. I'm glad to hear you're getting some funding, and I'm sure you're going to use it well.
Well, it's from the
But-
People's Fund because they don't dictate how you spend the money.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think I don't have a problem with people who are funding programs or projects, having expectations. I mean, I think they should have. I don't think they should control it. But I think, you know, you talked about evaluations and lack of follow through. You didn't use the word follow through, but in my mind,
Oh yes, you're
a
right.
lot of projects, programs are funded, and then it's like they're pushed off the side, and then the people who handle the grants go forward and they get some more grants up, and there's no one checking to see as to whether or not, you know, the deliverables have been fulfilled, have been delivered,
Yes.
and no follow through. And I think it's really good for everybody if that takes place, because you got to stick on, you know, you need to be on target and you need to stay with it.
Yes.
And didn't mean to get too far off on it, because really what I'm interested in us communicating is what you're working on. And one of my questions might be, well, okay, so you got all excited about this, and you have this passion, and you've been doing it for quite a while. Are there things that you can point to that we could say have been little victories or little successes? Has anything been accomplished that talk about measurable?
Yes.
Okay. Well,
Actually,
yeah.
some things have, you know, been accomplished, even though they might seem menini.
Yeah.
When we first started, there were 15 treatment beds at the women's prison. And the prison had about,
This is
at that
here on
time,
Oahu.
on Oahu in
Right.
Kailua, the only women's prison in Hawaii.
Yeah.
They had about 300 people there, and there were 15 treatment beds, yet over 90% of the women needed some sort of treatment, drug treatment. So we pushed, and for several years we pushed, and we finally got that increase to 64. So as
Wow.
I say, well
Well, that's
now we
quite an
only need
increase.
236 more,
Yeah.
but we got somewhere. And then for 8 years, I pushed a bill that seems like such a no-brainer: equality for women in prison.
What does that mean, equality?
Well, it
for
means
women?
that women would have opportunities, not exactly the same as the men, but they would have opportunities for job training, education, different types of programs, because the women were mostly serving dead time. And it took 8 years, but we finally got a bill passed that says that women and men are equal in prison, and they should have equal opportunities to rehabilitate themselves. Another bill that, another
Well,
law.
wait a minute, before we go on.
I'm sorry.
What does that mean when that bill gets passed now? It means that there's a law in the book
Yes.
that now, was it funded?
It was funded, yes,
Good.
last 2006.
Yeah, because there are money bills and then there are
Yes.
other than money bills.
Yes.
So there was some money that actually was
For the
put towards
department to
helping make
create
that
a
happen.
gender responsive prison for the women, which means that women's pathways to crime are different than men. And many of the prison protocols, the prison protocols are basically geared toward male violent offenders. Women, the violence of women is low. I think the latest stat was about 85% of the women are nonviolent, about 64% of the men are nonviolent. So we don't have a very high violent population. But women's pathways are very different. Mostly it's drugs, trying to be the super mom, and it's mostly ice. Trying to be the super mom, you know, the soccer mom, the
it
working
all.
mom, and you know, I keep telling the women, you know, that is a big myth. There is no such thing. But you know, I think the protocols, when a woman is pregnant and they were going to bring her to the hospital to deliver her baby, they actually put her in belly chains. And I'm saying, a woman who's 9 months pregnant, you think she's
Hello.
going to run?
Yeah, my goodness.
I don't think so. So it took things like that, those kinds of things that train the staff to understand that women are different than men and they need to be treated differently. Like at Halava, the guards will say, okay, out of your cells, line up. The men do. You know what the women say? Why? How come? Where are we going? You know, because we're different. Women like context. And so these kinds of things, it sounds kind of silly, but it actually means a lot when you're dealing with a woman who's in an extremely stressful situation.
Sure.
So that was a good accomplishment to pass that. And then, you know, since we've been sending all these people to, you know, banishing them to private prisons, and right now we have 175 women who are in Wheelwright, Kentucky, at a prison called Otter Creek. We passed a law saying it's a felony for any prison employee, contract employee, or contract prison and their employees to have sex with an inmate. There's no such thing as consensual sex. And yet that has happened. That has happened with our women, 2 of our women in Colorado. A case was just settled. And there's several things going on in Kentucky that are unsavory. And, you know, that is a felony. And those people who violated that law need to, you know, pay the price. They need to understand that there's no such thing as consensual sex.
So we've got 175
175
women from Hawaii.
Yes. Mostly
do they
moms.
have a what kind of a connection do they have to any support that might exist? I guess it must have to be here, because I mean you're moved all this ways away from your homeland, your families.
Yes.
Some of these potential support efforts that you're talking about, you take them, plop them down thousands of miles away. Who do they have to advocate for them there?
Well, in Kentucky, the women have nobody. Basically, my phone's the one always ringing, and I'm calling the department saying, this is happening, this is happening. And, you know, they'll call the prison, and the prison will say, oh, yes, we took care of that yesterday. How do we know that?
Yeah, but then there's no follow-up.
Yeah, we don't really know that. We send, the state sends monitors every quarter. But, you know, we don't
Let
really
me
know.
ask you, do you know what happens when these monitors visit the prison? Because I'm wondering, you know, sometimes people are sent out to check up on how something is progressing, and sometimes they talk to the people who really have the information. Sometimes they talk to people who maybe have an interest in not having all of it.
Yes.
You know, the truth fully transparent.
Well, you know, I think the only way you get real information is if you send an independent team. But this team that they send are the professionals from within public safety. So, you know, right away it leaves something to be desired. I started looking at monitors' reports, I guess about 3 years ago, and they were usually a narrative. After I started asking for them, now they're a checklist. And they became a checklist after Sarah Amau died in Otter Creek. And she was one of our women who was in prison. She was one of the first people sent to Texas. And she went the route, Texas, Oklahoma, Colorado, and finally Kentucky. And on December 31st, 2005, she died. And this is a woman who went into prison healthy. She was a model inmate. In Texas, they had this thing called I think they called it the inmate fog, because it was really foggy there. And they never let the inmates out in the yard because you could run and they couldn't see them.
Right.
But they always let Sarah out and to do the yard work because she was so trustworthy.
Yeah.
So she was really, you know, no write-ups, very compliant person. And she started to complain around, the women got to Otter Creek in like the end of September, beginning of October 2005, and she started noticing that she was having, you know, major stomach pains and big body pains. And for months she kept going to the medical unit saying, please, I need help. She called her family and said, can you pay for an independent doctor? Something is wrong, I don't know what it is. And they kept denying her. They gave her castor oil. And she was finally, on December 30th, she knocked on another inmate's door at about 1 a.m. The inmate opened the door, and they said she was so swollen you couldn't even tell her leg from her foot. It was just huge. So they ran, they got a guard, they put her in a wheelchair, they immediately rushed her to a hospital, a clinic, not good, so they had to then put her back in the ambulance, take her to a hospital, and she died there. And we still don't really know why. So something is really, really wrong. And then I started receiving anonymous emails from some women who were nurses at Otter Creek
Oh.
who told me that they quit because they were asked to do things that were out of their scope of practice. So I have grave concerns about the medical care. In the month of December 2005, when Sarah died, 2 other women were rushed to the hospital. One with pneumonia, the other needed a triple bypass. And these women also were told, you're going to be put in lockdown if you continue to complain and ask for help. I mean, why isn't that triggering a major investigation? You know, in Mississippi in 2006, the gates opened, the cell doors opened automatically at like 2 a.m. And it always happens in the administration segregation unit, which is lockdown. And 2 guys entered one of our people's cells and beat this man who's now absolutely brain injured and needs 24-hour care. Why didn't that trigger an investigation? Oh, CCA said it was human error.
CCA is what?
Yeah, Corrections Corporation of America.
Okay.
So, I mean, this is the kind of stuff. So we're really concerned that there's no independent oversight of the prisons, and we think that's what needs to happen. Unannounced visits, independent oversight, so that we have another set of eyes looking at what's happening to say, are they complying with the contract? Are our people getting the services that we're paying for? And are they treated humanely? And after going to Arizona in November, I have a resounding no.
Yeah.
I'm really disheartened and saddened.
Well, there's 2 sides to that. Your findings. One is you know, on the inmate side, that they're not receiving the services that I guess we're paying for, expect to receive for them. And then the other side is if the state is paying for that, then the state's not being served either. So I mean, it's kind of like the entire thing. You know, while you were talking, you said you've been involved in this for about 10 years. So did you have anything to do with Patsy Mink at any time, when Patsy was a representative for?
Yes, and actually, right before Patsy died, she had 2 bills that were really great. One started the girls' court, which we have now. Judge Karen Radius is the judge in that court. But she also was trying to reinstitute federal parole. That is very important for Hawaii, since we've instituted all these weed and seed areas. Because when this is a federal program that was started by the U.S. Attorney's Office here, and it's basically to catch drug addicts. And once you're caught, they designate an area. Chinatown is one, Waipahu is another, Kalihi is another, and I think they made Waianae another weed and seed area. So if you get caught doing drugs, selling drugs, doing drugs in those areas, you're off to federal prison.
Automatic.
So, and federal prison not having parole is a problem, because you need to give someone hope, a light at the end of the tunnel.
You know, we're running out of time here, and we've got a lot to talk about yet. But the reason I asked about Patsy Mink is because I admire a lot of the work that she did.
Me too.
And as far as I'm concerned, we lost quite a warrior.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm wondering, and my question is, do we have anyone to champion the causes as Patsy championed causes for women and for education and so forth? I guess the
Off the top of my head,
you know,
I can't think of anybody who's a warrior like that.
Yeah.
She was so fearless.
Yeah. Well, you know, at least we had have a model to aspire to, and in the meantime, I guess we have to just keep on doing it on our own until we can find the next political person who will get on board with us on some of these issues.
Well, you know what, Kaiapua, the government's not going to fix these things. It's going to be the people. And, you know, I really believe that people coming together and saying, why do we have so many people incarcerated? Why did Hawaii pass a 3 strikes law, you know, in 2006? Why are we passing all these punitive laws that are locking people up for a long time and then expecting them miraculously to come back into the community and be healed? when we've left them in a violent place with very little service or attention. This is wrong morally. It is an affront to anybody who has any humanity, and it is especially an affront to Native Hawaiians, who far exceed any other ethnicity in our prison population. Shameful.
Kat, thanks for being with us today. I think what you're emphasizing is the same thing that we try to emphasize at every opportunity, and that is the answers lie with us. The solutions lie with us, and we have to make these things happen. I'm really optimistic. You know, we talk about these little victories. If we didn't have them, it would be a pretty desperate place to be. But we are moving ahead. We are having some successes.
Yes.
And you're right. It's because the people have taken the initiative and loaded right in and put everything behind it. I'd like to thank you all for watching. I'd like to thank you, Kat, for doing the work that you do. Please keep it up. I know there are others in the community who are working on some of these issues, and I know you're all aligning.
Yes.
And as we come together on these things, we're going to make some good things happen. So mahalo nui.
Sure.
Mahalo nui.
Mahalo.
Join us again. Once again, this is Kaiopua Fife with the Kiwani Foundation. Voices of Truth, one-on-one with Hawaii's future. Hui ho.